Hello everyone. Thank you for taking time to come along to this Pegasus Business Update seminar where we're going to explore the topic of reverse charge VAT and find out what it's all about. My name is Steve Power and I'm a solutions consultant here at Pegasus Software, and I hope you find this session both interesting and informative. Here is the agenda of what I'm intending to cover with you in this particular session. Domestic reverse charge VAT for building and construction services is scheduled to come into force on the 1st of October 2019. So let us explore why HMRC are looking to introduce this into the construction industry. Because something must have changed which has given them the impetus to introduce a new way of controlling VAT payments. So a little bit of background to this topic will give you an understanding of the goals HMRC has set for this project. What is being proposed and who does it affect? It will only affect VAT on supplies where payments are required to be reported through the construction industry scheme, i.e. supplies between subcontractors and contractors operating in the construction industry. But let us explore this in more detail so that you get a detailed understanding of these new proposals, so that you know what this will mean to your business in terms of what you have to do to adhere to these new rules, because it will change the way in which you invoice your customers and how you will pay your subcontractors. Then we'll look at both Pegasus CIS and Opera 3 to see what has changed so that these products can operate within this new VAT regime. And finally, I'll share with you some questions that both customers and partners have asked Pegasus about reverse charge VAT over the last 6 months or so, and what our responses to those specific questions were. And hopefully those answers will give you a detailed and rounded view of what you'll need to do. Okay, let's get started. The driver behind these changes is the government's mission to clamp down on a particular type of crime known as missing trader fraud. Under normal circumstances, a subcontractor will charge the main contractor for the work carried out, adding 20% VAT. At the end of the VAT quarter, the subcontractor declares the VAT and pays it across to HMRC. Organised criminal gangs have found a lucrative way to exploit this. They fraudulently take over or create shell companies to steal the VAT, whilst operating alongside and providing actual construction services. This is commonly known as missing trader fraud. Companies undertaking missing trader fraud will initially operate normally, but after being paid for the work will disappear without filing the VAT returns and without paying the VAT money across to HMRC. Effectively, they're stealing the VAT. These bogus companies tend to operate for between 6 and 9 months before vanishing without a trace. The government calculates that it loses around 13 billion to missing trader fraud annually, with the construction accounting for about 100 million in lost VAT. These missing trader scams have operated in other sectors for more than a decade, such as trading in electronic goods like laptops, computer chips and mobile phones. Reverse charge VAT has been introduced into these sectors to combat this type of fraud. Now it's the construction industry's turn. Under these new rules, the VAT cash will no longer flow between businesses. A subcontractor will show VAT on an invoice to a contractor as a reverse charge. Therefore, each business transaction, VAT will be calculated as a paper exercise and recorded on the invoice as that reverse charge. When the contractor pays the subcontractor, it will not include the VAT element. It will just be the net value. Only client-facing organisations at the top of the construction supply chain will be required to charge VAT. Essentially, only the main contractor will charge that VAT. And it is only the main contractor that will pay that VAT across to HMRC at the end of their VAT quarter. As a general rule of thumb, any company that is registered under the construction industry scheme, CIS, will fall into the reverse charge VAT regime. Any company that is invoicing a client that is not CIS registered, then VAT must be charged, i.e. normal suppliers will be charged with VAT. I've created a flow diagram that explains how reverse charge VAT will work in the construction industry. Here is a typical representation of the tiered structure within the construction industry. Hopefully this will allow you to see where you fit into this structure and therefore how this might affect your business. At the top of the tree there is a customer who commissions some work to be undertaken. They will no doubt engage a main contractor to perform that work, who will oversee the project, control the finances and so on. Now remember, a customer could be a bank wanting a new call centre to be built, But equally, it could be me just wanting a garage to be built. So the main contractor to the bank would be possibly one of the top 10 building contractors in the UK. But equally, for my garage, it could be my local builder. I mention this just to highlight that this potentially has implications to all types and sizes of businesses in the UK construction sector. The main contractor will no doubt subcontract some of the work to specialist subcontractors such as electricians, plumbers, window contractors and so on. In larger contracts, there can be numerous subcontractors carrying out that work. At the bottom of the tree structure, there may be a non-VAT registered self-employed worker such as a bricklayer. Under the normal VAT regime, the self-employed worker would send an invoice to the subcontractor for the work done in that period. That would be VAT-free because they're not VAT registered, and the subcontractor would pay that invoice without any VAT. The subcontractor does some additional work. At the end of that period, they would then send an invoice to the main contractor for the work done. This time, the subcontractor is a larger VAT registered business, then that invoice would include VAT. At the end of the VAT quarter, they would pay that VAT across to HMRC and at the same time recovering any VAT they had paid to their subcontractors and suppliers. In this example, that would be zero VAT recovered because there was no VAT on the invoice from that self-employed worker in that period. However, they would pay the £30 VAT to HMRC, which is the value on the invoice to the main contractor. The main contractor does some additional work, and at the end of the period, they would send an invoice to their customer. This would include VAT. At the end of the VAT quarter, they would pay the VAT across to HMRC and at the same time recovering any VAT they had paid to their subcontractors and suppliers. In this case, they would recover £30 VAT from the subcontractor's invoice and pay the £40 VAT charge to their customer, i.e. the balance due to HMRC would be the difference. £10. And of course, the customer pays the main contractor pays the subcontractor pays the self-employed worker. How does this change under Reverse Charge VAT? Well, for the self-employed worker, there'll be no change. Their invoice to the subcontractor contains no VAT because they are not VAT registered. However, for the subcontractor, this is where Reverse Charge VAT kicks in. For example, the invoice will be £150, but the VAT will be accounted for as a reverse charge, which means the invoice will show the VAT as a reverse charge. When the main contractor pays the subcontractor, they would pay it without the VAT, which means at the end of the VAT quarter, the subcontractor would not pay that VAT across to HMRC. For the main contractor, the invoice will be £200 and the VAT is accounted for as a standard sales output. The reverse charge VAT from the subcontractor will be shown on the purchase input and included on their VAT return. But because it's a reverse charge, it will not be deducted from the VAT payment to HMRC. Essentially, the main contractor is accounting for and paying the VAT to HMRC. In this example, the total VAT payable to HMRC will be £40, as no VAT was paid to their subcontractors, i.e. they have accounted for and paid the full VAT on that contract. From the customer's perspective, nothing changes. They get a normal invoice from the main contractor, which includes the VAT. They pay that invoice, including the VAT. Now, remember what I said at the beginning of this flow diagram. The customer could be a large high street bank such as Barclays or NatWest, and maybe they're looking to have a new call centre built in, say, Manchester. They might engage one of the UK's largest construction companies as a main contractor to build that call centre for them. The relationship between the main contractor and the bank is one of standard VAT because the bank is not governed by the CIS rules. The bank is merely an end user who's receiving those construction services. The main contractor will no doubt engage many subcontractors, and here in my example, one of those subcontractors is a company called Pegasus Building Services, who will be building part of the call centre. And Pegasus Building Services might themselves engage their own subcontractors. In this example, Jason Smith Electrician. This is one particular example of a contract in the construction chain whereby Pegasus Building Services is acting as a subcontractor to the main contractor. In a second example, I am the customer and I'm looking for a garage to be built. And I look to engage a local builder to build that garage for me. And I've chosen Pegasus Building Services, in which case they become the main contractor in this particular contract. Pegasus Building Services again engage Jason Smith Electrician as a subcontractor. The relationship between the top 10 construction company main contractor and Pegasus Building Services will be one subject to Reverse Charge VAT. This is because the working relationship is governed by standard CIS rules. Both companies are working within the construction sector, both providing construction services. Therefore, Pegasus Building Services will be invoicing the main contractor with the VAT identified as subject to Reverse Charge VAT. And the main contractor will pay Pegasus Building Services net, i.e. without any VAT. The relationship between myself and Pegasus Building Services will be one that is subject to normal VAT rules. The reason for this, in this example, is that I'm a customer and not governed by CIS rules. I am merely an end user who's receiving those construction services from Pegasus Building Services, and they are building that garage for me. In which case, I will receive an invoice that includes both the services and the 20% VAT on those services. The key point here is that each contract you enter into has to be assessed to decide if Reverse Charge VAT will apply. In one contract you might be the subcontractor, where Reverse Charge VAT might apply to your sales because you're dealing with an intermediary supplier. But in another contract you might be the main contractor, where Reverse Charge VAT might not apply to your sales because your customer is the end user of your services. Also, you need to review your contracts with your subcontractors to decide if Reverse Charge VAT will apply to the service you receive. If so, then you need to notify those suppliers that this is the case with that particular contract. Okay, now let's have a look at construction services that will fall into the remit of Reverse Charge VAT. As I said earlier, as a general rule of thumb, any company that is registered under the Construction Industry Scheme, CIS, will fall into the Reverse Charge VAT regime. However, there is an important difference between CIS and the reverse charge where materials are included within the service. The reverse charge applies to the whole service, whereas CIS payments to net status subcontractors are apportioned and no deductions are made on the material content. So this is different to the standard CIS rules. The reverse charge VAT will cover the whole of the subcontractor invoice and not just the labour element of that invoice. Also, reverse charge does not apply if the service is zero rated for VAT. For instance, if this is a new house build, then this is zero rated, in which case the reverse charging will not apply. Here is a list of the services affected in the building trade, including but not limited to things such as construction, alteration, repair, demolition or dismantling of buildings or structures, including the related activities on the land such as walls, roadworks, power lines, communication equipment and so on. Installation of heat, light, water, communications and power systems, drainage, painting and decorating, together with internal cleaning of the building or structure if it is associated with the actual build or alteration. Civil engineering works and associated site clearance, excavation, foundation works, etc. This is not an exhaustive list, but you will recognise these definitions are linked to those defined by the CIS legislation. Some works will not be covered by Reverse Charge VAT and invoicing will continue as is. This includes professional services of architects, surveyors or of consultants in building, engineering, interior or exterior decoration or in the laying out of landscape. Drilling for or extraction of oil, natural gas or materials and tunnelling, boring or construction of underground works for that purpose. Manufacturing of building or engineering components or equipment, materials, plant or machinery, and delivering any of these things to site. Also manufacturing components for systems of heating, lighting, air conditioning, power supply, sanitation, and so on, and delivering any of these things to site. Artworks such as installing or repairing sculptures, sign writing and erecting, installing and repairing signboards and advertisements, the installation of seating blinds or shutters, or the installation of security systems. Again, these definitions are linked to those defined by the CIS legislation. Okay, now let's have a look at the effect that Reverse Charge VAT will have on the monthly or quarterly VAT returns you send across to HMRC. Let us go and have a look at the VAT codes and see which boxes on the VAT return are being updated with what values. Firstly, let us have a look at the standard sales VAT code. Here we can say that the VAT rate is set to 20%, and if we look at the VAT return boxes, we can see that if we post a sales invoice, then it will post the net value of that invoice to box 6 on the VAT return, i.e. to the box for total value of sales and all other outputs, excluding any VAT. and it will post the VAT value of that invoice to box 1 on the VAT return, i.e. to the box for VAT due on sales and other outputs. So this is standard VAT postings for sales. Now let us have a look at reverse charge sales VAT codes. Again, here we can see that the VAT rate is set to 20%. And if we look at the VAT return boxes, we can see that if we post a sales invoice, then it will post the net value of that invoice to box 6 on the VAT return, i.e. to the box for total value of sales and all other outputs, excluding any VAT. But it will not post any VAT values. As we said earlier, sales VAT will not be included on any sales invoices. It will be shown as a reverse charge. And we will not make any VAT payments to HMRC for these sales. Hence, box 1 on the VAT return will not show any VAT values for these type of sales invoices. Notice also that there is an ignore de minimis level box, and that is ticked. Remember what I said earlier, reverse charge VAT has been enforced in the electronics and mobile phone industries for many years. HMRC have a term called de minimis, which determines a transaction value at which the reverse charge VAT procedures should apply. This is currently set to £5,000. However, for the construction industry, there is no limit. In other words, all sales and purchase transactions will fall into the reverse charge regime irrespective of the transaction values. Therefore, tick this box for the VAT codes that apply to construction reverse charge VAT. Let's now have a look at the purchase side and the effect that reverse charge VAT will have on the monthly or quarterly VAT returns you send across to HMRC. Here again we can see a standard purchase VAT code and note that it has a VAT rate of 20%. And if we look at the VAT return boxes, we can see that if we post a purchase invoice, then it will post the net value of that invoice to box 7 on the VAT return, i.e. to the box for the total value of purchases and all other inputs excluding any VAT. And it will post the VAT value of that VAT invoice to box 4 on the VAT return, i.e. to the box for the VAT reclaimed on purchases and other inputs. Again, a standard purchase VAT posting. Now let us have a look at reverse charge purchase VAT code. Again, we can see that this VAT code also has the standard 20% VAT rate. And again, we can see that it has the ignore de minimis level box ticked. And if we look at the VAT return boxes, we can see that if we post a purchase invoice, we can see that it will make 2 of the same postings that a standard purchase invoice would make, i.e. it posts the net value to box 7 on the VAT return and it posts the VAT value of that invoice to box 4 on the VAT return. But notice, it makes an additional posting. It posts the VAT value of that purchase invoice to box 1 on the VAT return, i.e. to the box for the VAT due on sales and other outputs. Remember, the whole point of purchase reverse charge VAT is that the VAT is calculated on the purchase invoice, but there is no VAT actually paid to the supplier or the subcontractor. Equally, there is no VAT paid on sales invoices. Therefore, posting the purchase invoice VAT into the VAT value on the sales box means that these figures offset each other. There will be no VAT due or reclaimed from HMRC for these type of transactions. As just discussed, these VAT codes are created in Opera 3, but they are going to be used in Pegasus CIS. We therefore need to import them. If I hop across into Pegasus CIS, and if we go to the System Control, Ledger Links, Ledger Synchronization, we've got this option here to import those VAT codes. And let's do exactly that. Okay, if we now have a look at the subcontractors module, go into the subcontractors and find a particular subcontractor. In this case, I've looked for Winter Brothers Electrical. If we go to the trading tab, we can see that we can specify a VAT code default for this particular subcontractor. And in this example, I have set the default VAT code to be reverse charge VAT on purchases. In other words, the default for this subcontractor is to be treated under reverse charge VAT, where they will not get paid the VAT on their invoices. If we now hop across into a subcontract order and look at one specifically for Winter Brothers, we can see that we have the ability to override the VAT code. In other words, this is giving us flexibility in that it can be overridden for what is stored as the default for this subcontractor. So maybe this particular subcontractor order is to be 0 rated, in which case I can override that VAT code. If we print out a subcontractor order, let's preview as to screen. What we can see here, it prints out a notification for this subcontractor. that it is subject to reverse charge, and it tells the subcontractor that this order is subject to that reverse charge and that the contractor is responsible for paying the VAT on that invoice to HMRC. Okay, now let's have a look at posting a subcontractor invoice to see how this handles a reverse charge transaction. On this particular invoice, we can see that we have a labour value of £500, a material element of £100, making a gross payment of £600. We can also see that it's calculated the reverse charge VAT to be £120. And we can also see that it is deducting CIS tax at £100. So the net payment to this subcontractor is £500. In other words, there is no VAT payable to this subcontractor, even though there is a material element of £100. This is correct because the whole of the invoice is subject to reverse charge VAT. Okay, let's now go through and approve this invoice. Let's print out the audit trail. And here we can see that it is identifying the VAT as being reverse charge, and let's post that invoice. Now let's go through and pay Winter Brothers for that invoice they've just sent through to us. So the first thing we'll do is we will tag that particular invoice, we'll create the payment batch, and we'll now go through and produce the payment. First of all, we will print out their check. Okay. Then we'll print out the payment certificate. And here is the payment certificate showing us that the VAT is not going to get paid because it is subject to reverse charge VAT. And therefore the net payment is going to be the £600 minus the CIS tax, giving us a payment of £500. This is exactly as we would expect. And finally, let's go through and approve this invoice payment. Print out the audit trail report. Again, notice that it's showing us the value of the reverse charge VAT. That has completed the payment routine for that particular subcontractor. And finally, let us go through and generate the CIS 300 monthly return. Okay, let's look at that monthly return. Let's verify the content of the monthly return. Let's go through and submit that monthly return. And here's the monthly return we're sending through to HMRC. Let's submit that. And then it gives us the option to print out the subcontractor statements. And here we can see the subcontractor statement for Winter Brothers. We can see that payment that we've put through, and we can see the value of VAT, the value of the reverse charge VAT. This is exactly as we would expect. And if we go back into the subcontractor orders, and let's have a look at a list view, we can see that I've created a list view here specifically for the reverse charge orders. And here we can see a list of all the reverse charge orders we have for our subcontractors, dealing various bits of information and also showing us whether it is still open or whether it's been closed on a particular date. If we go into the subcontractor inquiries, look at all of the transactions and list them. Again, what I'm showing you here is we can create these list views to tailor them to give us information about reverse charge transactions. So I've got here a list view that shows me the reverse charge transactions, and I can see the reverse charge transactions that have been posted for Winter Brothers. Let me just summarise what we've just seen in the subcontractors module. This version of Pegasus CIS allows us to mark subcontractors as being subject to reverse charge VAT. We can do this on the subcontractor record, or we can assign this on an individual subcontractor order. And when we print that order, it states that the contract is subject to reverse charge VAT as required by these new regulations. As we also saw, when we pay the subcontractor, that payment is made withholding the VAT, and equally the VAT return to HMRC will therefore have the correct figures. So the subcontractors module is compliant with these new rules. Okay, now let's have a look at the implementation of reverse charge VAT in the contract sales side within Pegasus CIS. Remember, only the main contractor will charge VAT and pay that across to HMRC at the end of their VAT quarter. And that definition is based on who the customer is. If the customer is a company that is registered under the Construction Industry Scheme, CIS, then you will not be the main contractor and you will therefore fall into the reverse charge VAT regime. However, if the customer is a company that is not CIS registered, then you are the main contractor and VAT must be charged, i.e. normal supplies will be charged with VAT. Let's hop across back into Pegasus CIS, and if we go to a customer tab, if we go to the customer record and we look at the analysis tab, we might want to categorize our customers on that basis. So for instance, this customer is set up as a building contractor subject to reverse charge VAT, or I could choose this analysis code to say the customer is a non-reverse charge VAT customer. So I could take the approach of assigning one of these analysis codes to identify that customer. Equally, we could do this from a job record. If I have a look at a job record, on this particular job, Rothsay Ferry Terminal, I can see that we've got the job status set up as open and it's a VAT. If I go to my Kettering General Hospital, I can see that I've set the status to be open subject to reverse charge VAT. If I change the status code, I can see that in my example I've set one up to be open, current job, non-RC VAT, and I've got another one that's open job subject to RC VAT. In fact, however, this is actually stored under the sales phase. When we go to the sales phase on the analysis code, this is where we actually specify what VAT code is applicable. And in this example, I've set it to be reverse charge on sales. The reason I've shown you why using the job status might be useful is that it is visible for anyone who calls up a job record, so they can instantly see that this job is subject to reverse charge VAT, so that could be quite useful. Now let us raise a sales application, receive the associated certificate and see how this is all handled under these new reverse charge VAT rules. So the first thing I'm going to do is raise a sales application. I'm going to create a new application, and this is for Kettering General Hospital. This is the first application, and the application value is for £10,000. Minus the retention means that the net application is £9,500. Notice that it is using a reverse charge VAT code, and therefore the VAT is not being calculated, and that the payment expected is therefore the gross value minus the retention, i.e. £9,500. Let's go through and approve this, and let's print out the application for payment. Note that it has a statement, net application, excluding VAT, which is to be accounted for by the principal contractor. In other words, telling the principal contractor that their payment is to be made under reverse charge VAT rules. Now remember, these are the standard report layouts that come with Pegasus CIS. These can be amended for each individual customer to have their digital logos and wording put onto it. But this is something that will need to be done once you've installed this new version of Pegasus CIS, because these new messages are now available based upon the VAT code that is being used. And finally, let us go through and update that application and post it to the system. Here is the audit trail report, and again showing us that reverse charge VAT is applicable. Let's now say that the customer has sent us their first certificate for Kettering General Hospital, confirming what they are going to pay. So let's record the certificate. Okay, so this is for the first application. It's an interim payment for July, and what they're going to pay me in this example is £8,000. Notice that again it is telling me it is under reverse charge, and therefore there is no VAT due on this particular payment, and therefore minus the retention means that the invoice value is going to be £7,600. Let's save that away. Let's approve it. And then let us print out the related sales invoice. And here we can see that we have the sales invoice printed with the note, reverse charge, customer to pay the VAT to HMRC. In other words, telling the principal contractor that their payment is to be made under the reverse charge rules. And finally, let us go through and update the system with that approved certificate. And again, on the audit trail report, we can see that reverse charge VAT has been applied to the VAT. And of course, all of those transactions are getting posted to the job record. If we have a look at Kettering General Hospital, if we go onto the contract sales tab, we can see the application for 10,000 minus discount and retention means that the net application value was 9,500. We can see that they've certified 8,000 minus discount and retention means that their net certification value is 7,600. In other words, we're £1,900 apart from what's been applied for and what's been certified to date. Look at the sales tab. We can see that the value of the contract certificates is 7,600. We can see there's no VAT and therefore the payment due is 7,600. The payment received and therefore the balance that's outstanding. If we look at the summary tab, we can see the retention that's owed to us. We can see the revenue, we can see the costs, and therefore we can see the profit margin on this job. And if we look at the costs tab, then again we can see the actual costs coming through, we can see the committed costs from the subcontractor's orders, and therefore the total costs on this job. Contract costing as we would expect to see it. If we go to the list view, as we saw earlier, we can use these list views to identify contracts and transactions that are subject to reverse charge VAT. So I've created a list view that shows me all of my reverse charge contracts. Here's a list of those, and it just helps me go through and manage those particular contracts. So the list views are a useful way of looking at this information. Let me summarise what we've just seen in contract sales and job costing modules within Pegasus CIS. This version of Pegasus CIS allows us to mark those jobs and contracts that are subject to reverse charge VAT. This then allows us to raise sales applications under these rules with the customer being notified of the reverse charge VAT status. Also, to receive contract certificates accordingly, which means that the payment we receive from our customers will be made withholding the VAT, ultimately feeding through to the VAT return, making sure that the figures sent to HMRC will be correct. So the contract sales module is compliant with these new rules. I am conscious that I've concentrated on Pegasus CIS in this part of the presentation, but I am aware that we also have a number of our customers that operate in the construction marketplace but only have Opera 3. They use Opera 3 for their sales and purchase invoicing. We did go and discuss earlier that the VAT codes are created in Opera 3. This is because it is those Opera 3 VAT codes that determines if a transaction is to be under standard VAT processing or under reverse charge. And it is the setup of those VAT codes that determines if reverse charge VAT is to be invoked on a sales or purchase invoice. So, if we hop across into Opera 3, and if we go into the sales processing, let's create a new invoice for this customer. And let's say that this is £1,000. And I'm going to use a reverse charge VAT code. It confirms that I want to use a reverse charge VAT code. Yes, I do. And let's save that away. Let's post that invoice. And if we go and have a look at that transaction, here we can see that it has defined it as a reverse charge VAT code that's been posted there. This would be the same if I posted a purchase invoice as opposed to a sales invoice. As I said, it is the VAT code that defines if a transaction is subject to reverse charge processing. Similarly, if we go into sales order processing, and create a new invoice. Let me select a particular item. I want 2 of those. But I'm going to change the VAT code to be a reverse charge VAT code. Let's save that away and post it. And if we go and have a look at that transaction, here we can see in the VAT analysis section that the VAT code is a reverse charge VAT code, that the VAT value is set to 0, and the description is domestic reverse charge, just as we would expect. And if I raise a purchase invoice in the purchase order processing system, then I would see exactly the same functionality. As I have just shown, if you're using Opera 3, then you are equally compliant with Reverse Charge VAT, both in the sales ledger and in sales order processing, and in the purchase ledger and purchase order processing. So, Pegasus customers need to upgrade to the relevant versions of Opera 3 or Pegasus CIS to be compliant. Okay, in this section I'm going to share some questions that are being asked by our partners on behalf of their customers, and hopefully you'll find the answers informative. The first question was from a Pegasus partner that has customers asking the same question, and they asked, do we need to buy the EC VAT module to allow us to use Reverse Charge VAT within Opera 3? The answer to that question is fairly simple. No, you do not need to have the EC VAT module. There is no specific link to the EC VAT module for the construction industry. As discussed previously, the VAT codes between Pegasus CIS and Opera 3 are common. They are set up in Opera 3, but they are used by both products. In Pegasus CIS, the VAT calculation are performed and are posted back into Opera 3, where they then appear on the VAT return for submission to HMRC. And Reverse Charge VAT code can be applied directly to invoices within Opera 3 for those customers that do not have Pegasus CIS. And again, they will appear on the VAT return for submission to HMRC. So there is no requirement to have the EC VAT module to do any of this domestic reverse charge VAT. In another question, a customer asked if reverse charge VAT can only be used from within the sales order processing and purchase order processing modules within Opera 3. This is incorrect. As you saw earlier, I composed invoices and credit notes directly into the sales and purchase ledgers using reverse charge VAT codes. Equally, if you are using SOP and POP, then again, these can also use those same reverse charge VAT codes. So you can use SOP or directly posting into the sales ledger, or a combination of both. There's no restrictions here. An interesting question. I only have the subcontractors module. Do I need to upgrade to the full Pegasus CIS system to be reverse charge VAT compliant? Well, the answer really depends on how you raise your sales invoices. Obviously your purchases in the subcontractor module are compliant, but are your sales transactions? If you raise your sales order and invoices within Opera 3, then there won't be a problem. But if you have a third-party system that is used to create your sales applications and sales invoices, then you need to ask, does this system understand reverse charge rules? Does it understand how the VAT codes define what boxes on the VAT return need to be updated with which figures? If those figures are imported into Opera 3, or indeed any other accounting system, then does it update the sales ledger and the VAT return correctly? Importantly, if you do use a third-party application, you must perform this analysis ASAP, because it must work correctly by the 1st of October. If it doesn't work correctly, then you need to give yourself enough time to implement a compliance system, such as Pegasus CIS. Time is very short. Obviously, transition from one regime to another regime will have some issues. You'll no doubt be raising and receiving invoices to your customers and from your suppliers all the way up to the 1st of October 2019. So, how do you handle the transition? Transactions that are dated before the 1st of October 2019 will be dealt with under the current rules, but the transactions that are dated on or after the 1st of October will obviously fall into the new regime, in which case you need to make sure that your sales applications and invoices are being issued under the reverse charge VAT rules. Similarly, any subcontractor application and invoice you receive that are dated on or after the 1st of October need to be treated under these new rules. It may be that you receive a purchase invoice from one of your subcontractors that is charging VAT, where it should actually be charged as a reverse charge VAT. I guess you need to make the decision. Are you going to record and pay that invoice under the reverse charge rules, or return that invoice back to your subcontractor and ask them to reissue under these new rules? To help alleviate such issues, it could be prudent for you to do a review of your current contracts with both your customers and your suppliers to identify those that are subject to reverse charge. If you're a contractor, you'll need to review all your contracts with your subcontractors to decide if the reverse charge will apply to the services you receive under those contracts. If so, then you'll need to notify your suppliers that that's the case. If you're a subcontractor, you'll need to contact your customers to get confirmation from them if the reverse charge will apply. This needs to include confirmation if the customer is an end user or an intermediary supplier. By doing this, then you'll be better prepared to handle transactions as they arrive into your accounts office from the beginning of October. Now, I do have to say, HMRC are saying, and let me quote them, HMRC understands the difficulties businesses may have in implementing the domestic reverse charge and will apply a light touch in dealing with related errors in the first 6 months after introduction, where businesses are trying to comply with the new legislation. So there is a window of time to help you move to this new way of handling VAT. Are the filing dates for your VAT returns changing under these new rules? Reverse Charge VAT doesn't change how often businesses have to send information to HMRC. It's all about how the VAT information is being calculated. The VAT return periods remain the same, which is usually quarterly, but it could be monthly or annually. However, your frequency doesn't change. Neither does the date by which you have to pay HMRC, which is 1 month and 7 days after the end of the VAT period. Also, VAT registered businesses do not need to provide any more information than they currently do. It's just the 9 boxes on that VAT return. Let me recap on what we've covered in this session. Reverse Charge VAT comes into force on the 1st of October 2019, so there's not a great deal of time to prepare. It operates in the construction industry where the payments are governed by HMRC's Construction Industry Scheme. If you raise invoices to contractors, then the Reverse Charge VAT will apply. However, if you also invoice customers directly, then you'll need to send a standard VAT invoice to that customer. But you'll need to make that decision based on the type of contract you have with your customers to ensure you're issuing the correct type of invoice. Equally, if you use subcontractors, then you need to determine which of those contracts, and therefore the invoices and payments, are subject to Reverse Charge VAT. We've not previously discussed this, but cash flow will be affected for businesses operating in the construction sector. For small to medium-sized businesses, they will no longer be able to rely on the VAT money for short-term cash flow, since no VAT is paid on those invoices. For major contractors, they may also have to pay much larger sums of money to the Exchequer. Because they will not be paying VAT to their subcontractors, they will be collecting and paying that VAT across to HMRC. So their quarterly VAT payments will be substantially higher. As a result of Reverse Charge VAT, some businesses may find that because they no longer pay the VAT on some of their invoices to HMRC, they become repayment traders, i.e. their VAT return is a net claim from HMRC instead of a net payment to HMRC. If a business becomes a repayment trader, they might want to consider applying to move to monthly VAT returns as opposed to quarterly. This would speed up the receipt of payments they are due from HMRC, potentially improving their cash flow. So impacts on cash flow need to be considered for all types of businesses in the construction sector. The implementation of Reverse Charge VAT within the Pegasus products means that you need to upgrade Opera 3 to version 2.6102 and upgrade Pegasus CIS to version 4.10. But it is not simply just about applying these upgrades, there are some other considerations. In Opera 3, it will be necessary to create the new Reverse Charge VAT codes as discussed previously. In Pegasus CIS, you'll need to import these Opera 3 VAT codes so that they can be used within the system. After that, then you'll need to amend your report layout because the Reverse Charge VAT values must not appear in the VAT and invoice totals, they must be shown separately, along with the statement that Reverse Charge VAT is being applied. Your existing report layouts will not have the correct layout, so they need to be updated. So reports such as your sales applications, sales invoices, subcontractor orders, payment certificates and monthly statements and so on will all need to be amended. As always, your partner is there to help you. So talk to them about installing the software and implementing Reverse Charge VAT, along with modifying your document layouts and so on. But plan. Don't leave this until you're at the point where you need to send your first sales invoice under the new Reverse Charge VAT rules when they apply. After all, you don't want to delay that request for payment for the work that you've already done. In the Pegasus Help Centre, there is a Pegasus CIS 4.10 release guide that takes you through the Reverse Charge VAT and how it's been implemented within the software. But also, if you go to the Pegasus website, pegasus.co.uk, you'll find this data sheet that gives you a concise overview of Reverse Charge VAT, along with a concise description of how it's been implemented within Pegasus CIS and Opera 3. If you go to the government website, gov.uk, and type into their search engine, Reverse Charge VAT, there will be a number of results returned. But the best one to look at is the one that I've shown here, the VAT Domestic Reverse Charge for Building and Construction Services. This goes into the topic in some depth. So if you want to know the ins and outs of the subject in depth, then read this document. I would also recommend that you periodically come back to this government website because they might be updating their information sheets as we get closer to the implementation date. Also, keep an eye out for the Pegasus Outlook newsletters we send out to customers, and have a look at the Help Centre that is available both within Opera 3 and Pegasus CIS. These are all useful sources of information. Okay. That concludes this particular session. I hope you found this session useful in understanding what reverse charge is all about and how it's been implemented within the Pegasus software solutions. If you have any questions, then please feel free to email me at steve.power@pegasus.co.uk. It just remains for me to say thank you for taking time to listen to this particular session. Hope you found it useful. Goodbye.